there, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. So I had a project that kind of stems from these two circles that I have had sitting in my little stash for a while, and I had this idea that I wanted to do for a little while too, so everything just kind of came together today and we're going to make these kind of faux glass domes. Now these two circles are actually kind of have ink. I think they've had ink swiped or splattered on them at some time, and so every time I see them on my stash I kind of go past them because they have these little spots and things all over them, and it's sort of a brownie ink. I know that I had cut them from my Hero Arts Infinity dies, and so they were just kind of sitting in the back there, sitting by those, and so today is the day that something is going to happen with them. So I'm going to start off with a bit of disguising. I'm starting off with the background music cling stamp. This one is from Stampendous. There are many out there. Any background noise is going to work well. You could just use a scripty stamp, you could use any dots, any kind of background stamps that kind of fill in things. Use smaller stamps to kind of add a little bit more as well and put them all together. Anything can be made to work. This is just background noise. And I decided to use some of the pine cone ink. This is a VersaFine clear ink. It's pigment and it was really dark, so I definitely took off a couple of layers to begin with on a scrap piece of paper. And then I decided for the second one, just to be a little bit different, to use a Distress Oxide. This is Vintage Photo. Again, I'm just going to take off a little bit first. I don't need these images or prints to be perfect. This is really just background noise to A, disguise all those little splotches and things, and B, just to kind of make the background not quite so plain. You could leave it plain though, I guess, if you wanted to. Also, you maybe wouldn't need it if you were doing a coloured background to begin with too. I am going to take the text background stamp from Woodware and just add a little bit of stamping there. Sometimes I stamp off just to get not such a dark impression, but either. Again, you could do this with any stamps or just leave it off altogether. Doesn't matter. So I have a couple of circles ready to go, and then I was also looking at my little scrap bin, and this was a bit of like a scrap buster day, just trying to make sure I use little things before I pick up new things and die cut new things. So I'm bringing out an old favourite here. This is the Dainty Blossoms by Pinkfresh Studios, and these have been endlessly fun. Now these are also some prints I did, the yellow and orange ones using Simon Hurley's stamping foam, and I have a whole video on the 3-dimensional looks I get there. And then the blue one was one that my son had created alongside us when he was just having fun one day when I was crafting. He was crafting too, and so I asked him if I could use a little bit of his print, and he was happy with that. Again, I know this seems kind of like a waste cutting into that gorgeous print, but I had made all the cards that I could possibly make or felt like making or needed with these, and so these were leftovers, and I may as well use them up, and they're really nice textured coloured cardstock to die cut into. So I have one there with the kind of blues and greens and then the yellows and oranges, and I am going to, this is where I kind of begin the dome, and I'm going to create this using embossing powder. So I have some VersaMark sticky embossing ink here, and it is worth getting a good sticky embossing ink because I find that this causes less stress. It's also worth getting a good re-inker for it because there's nothing worse than when embossing goes wrong. That can be a huge frustration. But for the first layer, I'm going to use just regular, normal, clear embossing powder, and I find that this also helps the process when I'm going to add the ultra thick embossing powder after this. So you can see it's got a bit of a shine on it at the moment. I'm making sure it's cool enough that I can add my embossing powder again. Then I'm going to bring in the ultra thick embossing powder. If you don't have this, then you can use the fine embossing powder. That is exactly the same, but as you see, I have this massive tub that I need to use up, so whenever I get the chance, I try and make the effort to use this. With the ultra thick, I do find it easier to heat from the bottom. If I heat from the top, then more often some of the chunks fly off, not really badly, but just enough to be kind of annoying and make a mess. So I will often heat from the bottom, and I just heat until that layer is completely melted. Then I'm going to do a third layer, dip it in that little pile that I have there and melt that. It doesn't really matter how many layers you do. It's whatever you kind of feel comfortable with or you feel like is working. It's going to be different depending on the grain and the thickness of the embossing powder that you have. Then once I have 3 in there, I'm going to grab my little Dainty Blossom die cut here, and whilst the embossing powder is still kind of wet, I'm going to pop in the die cut. Now at the moment it is kind of doming up because we have about 3 or 4 layers on here. Now I'm going to really kind of leave this embossing powder on top. You can see I kind of scooped up some and I did not tip it off. There is a big pool of it on top there, and this is where we're going to start creating our dome. Now, when you are using kind of this amount of embossing powder, it will kind of even out towards the edges a little bit. So when I'm at this point and I feel like I have quite a bit of embossing powder there, it's melted, I'm able to literally just kind of pick it up, drop it in and heat it, because when there is melted embossing powder underneath it, it's going to melt really fast when I pop it on top. So you can see I have it on and it just melts really, really fast. And I'm building it up. It's leveling out a little bit, but staying domed up in the center a bit too. So once I have that done, I'm going to let that dry. Once it is dry for a couple of minutes, I'm going to actually put a couple of books on top of it so that it stays flat. So don't put it on straight away, because the embossing powder will stick to something because it's not fully dry. But once you think it's dry, I laid a couple of books on top, and that way it won't go wrinkly or dome up. It'll stay nice and flat. Now, this might be one of my favorite color combos that I've used. This is just Twisted Citron and Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide inks. And I'm going to pop this down on a little non-stick mat. This is actually the replacement mat for the glass media mat, the Tim Holtz one. I don't have the glass media mat, but this is the perfect size non-stick sheet for me, and I love it. It's got a really low price point and everything good about it. It has that silicone backing so it doesn't creep anywhere. Now, once I kind of dipped this in one time, and this, I don't know, this just created the most beautiful watercolor piece, and I struggled to continue to use this, but I'm going to march forward. I'm just looking at it. I feel like that's a really nice watercolor piece, and if I had my way, I probably would have left this and popped it to the side, but that's my hoarding tendencies coming out, so I just marched on and added a little bit more because I'm always afraid of kind of ruining what I've created, but onwards and upwards. So I created one print here, and I was pretty happy with how that one looked, but I figured because I had so much ink there, I would create a second one, and you just never know, sometimes the second one I like better, but sometimes it creates just as good as a print as well. So I'm just going to keep going and use up some of that ink, keep dipping it in. I feel like I need to do another project with these two colors together, because I don't know, for whatever reason, maybe I haven't put them side by side or just had the two of them, but I feel like I'm just discovering this combo is one that really, really works well with me. So anyway, I dipped a couple in and I keep re-dipping. I'm drying between layers, and then this hurts me a little bit, but I'm going to pop down some Vintage Photo, some of the brown, and I'm going to really water this down. I added a lot of water because I only have one brown ink. That's the only Vintage Photo is the only Oxide brown ink that I have. So that's my choices, and if I want a less kind of saturated look, then I just need to add more water to make it tone it down just a little bit. And you can see I did the second print first, and here I was looking at the first print thinking, can I do it? But I did. I dipped it in, and I do really like the results. It looks really nice. And the point was that I wanted to bring in some of the brown that was going to be on my focal image as well. So once these are completely dried, I have one more technique I'm going to add to one of these, and this is a favorite of mine. I have this little dotty kind of stencil, the exact same Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink that I put on the background, and I'm just going to go over the stencil, give it a very, very light misting, just 1 or 2 squirts, and then pop this down over top of my print here, my card front that I've created. Then I'm going to get a piece of paper towel to pop up just to mop up anything that might seep through. Give it a nice even press over, and then bring it off, and you're never going to get a perfect impression, but I just really like this look. I think it adds a lot to it. It's kind of like using a stamp if you had kind of a texture stamp, but we are able to use our stencils for it. So I really, really like that. At this point, when it's still kind of damp from the water and things, you could also add a clear embossing powder, and that would keep the shine. Otherwise, it's going to go fairly matte, just like the rest of the Oxide. So I'm going to do this to the other one as well. So a light spritzing of water, pop this down, and then pop a paper towel on it. I did debate doing this on an angle as well, but I thought I would just keep this one straight. And again, I get another nice little print that kind of just adds an extra little something, and I was really happy with those 2 extra little bits. So that is the backgrounds kind of created, done and dusted. Then I'm going to move on to kind of putting everything together. Now this is the Lawn Fawn cardstock. I'm just going to create a card base. This is kind of the craft cards that I use, the craft cardstock, sorry. I cut down all my card bases and I cut down all my card fronts myself and just keep a good stash of them going. And then once I had done this, I thought that the craft color wasn't quite what I was after. So I'm actually going to add more of that vintage photo, that brown color, to the outside. And this way it's just going to match a little bit more, be a little bit darker than what the craft cardstock was. Again, you could skip this step, or you might just choose to use some brown cardstock as your card base instead. Lots of different ways, depending on what you have in your stash ready to go. I just use a little finger dauber, and it only needs to be around the outside because I'm going to pop my card front down as well. And then once I had done the card base, I kind of thought I wanted a little frame around my glass dome as well. So that is one really handy thing about the infinity circles. Any of those kind of layering, nesting die sets are going to work really well, because that means you can die cut a circle that is just a fraction bigger than the one that you already cut out, and without having to kind of have two bigger gaps in between the different sizes. So I'm going to pop down my little glass dome onto that frame, and it's going to frame it up nicely. Then I'm going to pop down my card front panel onto my card base. My card base measures 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And again, I think this is the right place where I like that darker brown as a frame rather than the really light frame. These are the Paper Rose sentiment sets. I have used these a lot. These are really good. I'm really impressed with these. And just for this time round, because everything was kind of so light, and just because I wanted it to stand out, I really like that, just a card to say you're awesome. But I thought I would actually get it in the black down there, because I think that the white would just get a little bit lost, because this card is fairly busy. Just having a check through to check that there's not another one that I do want. And I keep all my little bits in here, all my scraps with all the different sentiments on it. This is the black and white one, but the all occasions one is another one that I have, and I'm loving both of these. I won't need to buy them for a really long time because these are going to last me forever. And I came back and I just really like that one, so I'm going to stick with that in the black. I'm using my long bladed scissors. These are the Tim Holtz ones, and that means I can just kind of snip these out really nicely. But if you need to use a paper trimmer, that's going to work well too. And then I'm just going to pop this down with some double-sided tape. I popped plenty there on the back, and that's going to hold it nicely onto my card base. And I'm not going to add any more dimension because the little dome there, the embossing powder, has created some dimension, so I didn't want to make it really, really big. Just peeling off the double-sided tape, and there are lots of different ways I could have laid this out, but I'm going to kind of go up to the top right a little bit, and then that way you can kind of see a little bit of all of the background, all of those techniques that we used, and everything's going to fit nicely. So that is my little card for today. I hope you have enjoyed this one. All of the links to the products will be down in the description box below this video. If you are ever looking for information, then that is the place that you'll find it. There's my email address, there's my mailing address. I have a P.O Box. I love to receive cards and mail and things. That makes me really happy when I clear my box and there's some beautiful things in there. And just thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you being here. I hope you've enjoyed this card and perhaps you were inspired to give something similar a go. But other than that, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, bye.